Hey guys, it's Loaf. I'm doing another build guide today with the fun challenge I've been doing the last few days on stream. Most of the people I had talked to in the last Epoch community were telling me that Spellblade was one of the hardest classes to play in hardcore, and I wanted to see what I could do about that. The big issue Spellblade has in hardcore is that it has very little damage reduction sources, especially for being melee. I'm going to fix that issue by building around a few key unique items. While this version of the build is going to be more expensive than most, I will also include a cheaper version for softcore. That version will only require one unique, be a little less defensive, and have even more damage. Alrighty guys, let's go ahead and get into the build. The first skill that we have is Firebrand. Firebrand is a melee attack that is going to grant us a buff. This buff is going to be stacking and it's going to continuously give us more melee fire damage. Now, how we're going to be speccing this skill, we're first going to be going over to Pyro Shielding. We'll be grabbing all 5 points here. This is going to grab us some ward every time we use Firebrand. We'll also be grabbing all 3 nodes and Fading Flame. You gain ward when a stack of Firebrand expires or is consumed. 3 points into Warding Flames. You gain ward per second per stack of Firebrand. Wildfire. Firebrand can have more maximum stacks. And then the 2 key nodes for this skill. Incineration. Your next melee attack that is not Firebrand consumes all stacks of Firebrand and deals more damage per stack consumed. And the final piece here, consuming 3 or more stacks of Firebrand with Incineration guarantees a critical strike. So the skill isn't really used for damage. This is what's going to build up our big one-shots that are just going to clear the entire screen. Alright, now our next skill and our main damage dealer is going to be Flame Reave. This is a fiery explosion that shoots out in a cone in front of you. With one of the unique items we're going to be using, this is going to change it into a giant circle explosion instead. This is the skill that you were seeing in the intro that was clearing out the screen. Now first we're going to want to go over to Dancing Flames. We'll take 4 nodes here. This will give us a little bit of extra attack speed and less mana cost. We'll then be grabbing Rhythm of Fire. So every 4 uses of Flame Reave has greatly increased width and damage. Now the big portion for this node here is once we grab Versatility. So using Firebrand is going to count as using Flame Reave when it comes to the Rhythm of Fire's node. So that's going to synergize really well with how we have Firebrand set up. So every 3 attacks of Firebrand is going to give us that 100% crit strike chance on top of increasing the damage and width now of our Flame Reave. Next up, we're going to want to grab some travel nodes down here. These are going to give us a little bit more melee damage. We're then going to go into Ember Infusion, more melee damage and a little bit of extra mana cost. That won't be a big deal though. And then we'll go over to Flame Collar. So Flame Collar is going to make Flame Reave return to you after the initial explosion comes off, doing part of the initial hit's damage. This will really help for clearing up some of the bigger rares and stuff that you'll encounter, making sure you get those one-shots off. After that, we're just going to head up north here and grab these 2 different nodes. We're going to max both of them out. They're basically just giving us melee fire damage. So we'll get 12 here, melee fire damage, and then another plus 20 here. For our third skill, we're going to be using Enchant Weapon. This is just a buff that we're going to be keeping on our autocast the entire time. So there's 2 parts to this skill. You have an active and a passive ability. So the passive that you're going to have all the time is your melee attacks deal 15% more elemental damage. And the active, you're going to enchant your weapon with elemental power. Your melee attacks deal 50% more elemental damage for 5 seconds. And then all the nodes we grab are going to benefit from the active ability. So first we're going to want to grab all 5 nodes in Celerity. This is going to give us 50% increased attack speed. We're stacking a lot of attack speed on this build. It's going to give us a lot of synergies with our ward generation. Next you want to grab Molten Steel. This is going to give us plus 25 flat fire damage, as well as 100% increased melee fire damage. Next we'll go over to Concentration. This is going to add an extra 4 seconds to our duration of Enchant Weapon, giving us a lot more uptime. So the base duration is 5 seconds. That will give us a total of 9. After that, we're going to go over to Desperation. This is going to give us increased melee elemental damage per 2% of missing mana. Over here, we have Efficacy. This is going to give us a passive that's going to make this cost less mana. This is going to completely negate any mana cost an enchant weapon had, making it really easy to have an auto cast. And on top of that, you're going to deal 40% increase in melee elemental damage. We'll also be grabbing the point into Frozen Sparks. Now, while we're not mainly specializing for lightning and cold damage, we don't really have any other places that make a lot of sense for our build since we're not playing lightning based or scaling ignite in any way. This is going to give us additional cold and lightning damage based on the physical damage on our weapon. So it actually gives us a pretty good chunk of just flat damage here. And then the last node we're putting over in Cleanse by the Elements. So when we activate Enchant Weapon, it's cleansing off any negative ailments, and it makes it cost a little more mana. The mana cost doesn't do anything. Because we're taking the points over in Efficacy, it still makes the mana cost be 0. Now the big reason we're going for the Cleanse Ailments is the really sketchy mobs that they added this patch that do all the poison damage were definitely what we're struggling with the most, and this helps clear off those poison stacks, giving you a ton of survivability. Our next two skills that we're going to be grabbing are staples in pretty much every single mage build you're going to find. So the next skill is Flame Ward. This is a defensive cooldown that's going to give us a whole bunch of ward at once. And it also does a little bit of retaliation damage to enemies that attack it. We're going to mainly be focusing on the defensive aspects. The first two nodes you're going to grab are the Stalwart Defense. This is going to give us an additional 80 ward when we use Flame Ward. We're then going to go up and grab here Desperate Defense. So a percent of missing health is granted as ward. It's going to end up giving us 12%. We'll then go here to the left to Astonish. This is going to automatically cast Flame Ward for us anytime we get stunned. That's a lot of the times where I see the deaths in mage builds. Anytime you get stunned and you're not actively generating ward, it's pretty much a death sentence. This is going to save you more times than you can count. After that, we're going to grab 2 points into Fuel to Flames. So Flame Ward grants more ward, has a slightly longer cooldown. We're not too worried about the cooldown here because of this next node. The next node is Dual Aegis. This is going to give us an additional charge to Flame Ward. This is especially nice when we pair it with the auto cast from stun. That way, if we happen to get stunned and it uses one of those charges, we still have a backup charge if we get into some trouble. Next, we'll be going over here to Barrier. Now, the big problem that we went over with Spellblade earlier is that it doesn't give a lot of damage reduction. This is one of the few places that we do get it. So while Flame Ward is active, we take 40% less hit damage. That is massive. Next, we'll be grabbing 2 points into Prismatic Barrier. This will also negate 20% of the elemental damage we're taking. After that, we're going to go over and grab all 3 points into Energize. This is going to make Flame Ward give us some additional ward, but it's going to be over time. So we're going to get 45 ward per second that it's active. And then to synergize with Energize here, we're going to be grabbing Dilation. This is going to increase the duration of Flame Ward by 33%, which is going to give us more of those ticks of ward there. And then it will also make the mana cost a little bit less, which isn't really a big deal. For our final skill, we're going to be grabbing Teleport. This is going to be our movement skill, as well as we're going to set it up to give us a whole bunch of different buffs. Now, the first buff that we're going to grab here is Ether Barrier. This is going to give us 35 ward every time we cast Teleport. After that, we're going to grab 3 nodes into Out of Body. This is going to convert a portion of our health into ward. So getting a large maximum health pool is going to really help this. It's going to convert 9% of that over to ward. Next, we're going to go over here and grab Elemental Affinity. This is going to give us 50% increased elemental damage. That's going to be really big for trying to get those one-shots that clear out the entire screen. We're going to take 2 travel nodes into Crystalline Passage. It's going to give us some cold res, which doesn't really matter, and a tiny bit of armor. We're not really stacking armor, so it doesn't do a whole lot for us. The main nodes that we're looking for is Time Dilation. This is going to increase the uptime of all of the other buffs that we had mentioned before by 100%. So typically with the buffs that we gain from teleport, it's only going to last for 4 seconds. Adding the 100% increased duration here is going to bump that up to 8 seconds, giving you pretty much 100% uptime on all the buffs here. Next up, we have the Mage Passive points for the base tree. You're going to first want to grab the Arcanist nodes. We'll grab all 8 here for some intellect and resistances. Next up, we're going to grab Scholar, mainly just for the flat health. The mana's not going to do a whole lot for us. And we'll work over here on Mage Flurry. We'll grab all 5 nodes for the increased attack speed. It's going to synergize with a lot of the other nodes from Spellblade later on. Then the points up here, we're going to want to skip for a while. You don't want to grab these until after you've gotten most of the ward nodes from the Spellblade tree. This is mainly just a travel point, so we can get the 50% ward retention that comes out of Warden. Next up, we have the passives in Spellblade. We're going to start up here at the top in Elemental Affinity. This is going to help us finish off our elemental resistance, as well as give us a little bit of extra damage. Next, you're going to want to go into Arcane Warden. This is going to be the start of our ward generation for this build. What it's going to do is give us 40 ward every time we land a melee attack, which is why we're stacking so much attack speed on other nodes. After that, you can grab all 8 points into a fused weapon. Pretty self-explanatory, it's just going to give us a whole bunch of flat elemental damage. Next, we'll go into Arcane Shielding. As long as we've landed a melee attack recently, we're going to get reduced damage taken, as well as a little bit more ward generation. At the start, I would just put 1 point into Warden's Echo. It gives us a tiny bit of damage into our Firebrand, but the main purpose for it is that the travel nodes we can get into Defender of Welrin. This is going to give us 40% ward retention, which is going to be pretty key with our defensives. After that, we can go into Fireblood. It's going to give us 8 vitality, just going to add to our HP, and then also a little bit more of the melee fire damage there. Next up is Essence Duel, so more attack speed there, as well as more ward generation every time we land a melee attack. It's going to synergize great with the Arcane Warden here. Now the Mana Reaver node, this part is key. This is how we're sustaining all of our mana cost. So every time we're landing a melee attack, we have a chance to get 30% of our mana back, as well as gain just flat 10 mana. It also gives us a tiny bit of health back as well. Next up, we have Prismatic Blade. Again, pretty self-explanatory, just a whole bunch of flat elemental damage, and the dexterity will also scale Flame Reave. These next 2 nodes are the big damage nodes for Flame Reave. So Valka's Razor, how it works is it only triggers if your elemental melee attack, it costs more than 10 mana. So that's going to be our Flame Reave, right? So it's going to give us 150% increased elemental damage. That's also going to allow us to grab the nodes into Blade Weaver. What this will do is works very similar to how Firebrand functions. So if you're using a skill that costs less than 10 mana, which Firebrand does, it's going to put a building stack there for you that's going to make your next attack that costs more than 10 mana deal extra damage. So you're building up to 5 stacks, and then you're consuming all of them with Flame Reave to get that big juicy hit. We're only taking the 5 points in there because you're not going to ever want to go over 5 stacks of Firebrand without using a Flame Reave. You're just wasting damage at that point. And then the remaining 5 nodes, we'll just throw into Mental Fortitude. We don't have very many better options. The extra intellect will also give us ward retention, and then we get a little bit more ward per second here. Okay, boys, next we are going to jump into the gear that we're going to be using. First, I want to tackle the different unique items that I'm pairing with this build that really gives it that extra layer of survivability and kind of what they're each used for. So the first mandatory unique we have is Sun Reave. Now this is what makes Flame Reave turn from a frontal cone attack to doing the giant circle around us. So this one is absolutely necessary. I would not trade this out for anything. The next item that we're using here for a unique is the Bastion of Honor. This is a new item that just came out this recent patch. What this allows us to do is get 100% block chance against nearby enemies. So it takes a build that typically couldn't get any kind of block synergy or enough of any of those stats to make it worth it and give it a whole new layer of defense. On top of getting the 100% block chance against nearby enemies, you can also get up to 14% less damage taken from nearby enemies, So another part where we get some damage reduction on the build that didn't have before. Next, we're going to throw in the Wings of Argentus. Now, again, we're getting 40% less damage taken while moving. During the intro clip there, you can see I'm stutter stepping pretty much all of my Firebrand attacks and Flame Reave there. That's giving me that proc, that damage reduction. Make sure I'm not getting spiked down by anything heavy or taking too much damage at once there. And then on top of that, we get up to 100% increased melee fire damage. So a good chunk of damage, pretty similar to what we'd be able to get with like a rare chest there. And then the +1 to fire skills doesn't hurt as well. Then you do get a little extra zoom on the build by getting haste when you get hit there. Then the last unique that I'm running, I've played around with the Throne of Ambition a little bit. You can get an extra idol that will give you more elemental melee damage, but the single target potential for this unique is huge. It made killing shades and mono bosses so much easier. So I would recommend having this one in here. It's not mandatory at all. You'd do just as good probably with the melee elemental one. I just like the tiny bit of extra single target I get here. For the rest of the gear, I'm just going to hover over each item quickly just to show you the stats that I believe would be best in slot for this build. It's mainly just a whole bunch of elemental damage, whether that's to melee attacks, fire damage, or just percent elemental damage. That's what we're looking for in most things. Make sure you get a crit multi where you can and attack speed. Those are probably the two most important stats here for the build to scale everything. On the idols and blessings, I try really hard not to get any resistances on there, as I don't want to make the gearing process too complicated or feeling like you have to have the resistance there. But if you do happen to get some good blessings that do give you resistance or crit avoidance or anything like that, I would simply just swap out some of the suffixes on your gear and add more health to the build. Thank you guys for checking out the build. If you enjoyed the video and would like to see more of this content, hitting like and subscribe would help a ton. You can see me make these builds live at twitch.tv/pinchingloaf. I'm live pretty much every day at 8 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. I'd love for you guys to come say hi. Thank you for watching the video, and I will see you guys live on Twitch tomorrow to start our new build.